For us, the anti-capitalist allegory is only one very small part of Squid Game. I often say to people, Star Wars is about swashbuckling rebels overtaking an empire, but people don't necessarily just focus on that as being about freedom or being about anti-imperialism. So for us, that was one element. It was also about how we're ingrained from childhood to be competitive. These games are all childhood games, and they're supersized, and it brings out this childhood competitive spirit in everyone. Before we begin, I want to thank this video's sponsor, Fume. A lot of people feel overwhelmed now, and when you're overwhelmed, it's easy to fall into bad habits, and trying to move away from them can cause even more stress. That's where Fume comes in, an innovative, award-winning flavored air device. No vapor, no harmful chemicals, just sweet, sweet air in a variety of tastes. I'm a fan of crisp mint because I'm a freak who likes mint, but you can also try orange, vanilla, and more. Your Fume even comes with an adjustable airflow dial designed with movable parts and magnets for fidgeting, giving your fingers more to do, which can also be helpful for de-stressing while breaking your habit. It feels nice, it looks nice, and if you head to tryfume.com/JackSaint or scan the QR code and use code JackSaint, you'll get 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. You can even upgrade your Journey Pack to the Solano to enjoy the premium walnut barrel and onyx black coated mouthpiece that has a smoother finish, and still get 10% off. That's tryfum.com and use code JackSaint to get an additional 10% off of your order today. Thank you. Squid Game is good. I feel like there's been a somewhat contrarian push to call Squid Game overrated or outright bad over the past year that I've even had expressed to me by some viewers when I said I'd be making a video on this subject. And I definitely understand some of the criticisms people have for the show. Aside from minor points about certain predictable plot beats, especially if you've watched one of these fight-to-the-death battle royale types of media before, I did find the ending pretty underwhelming. Certain character actions, like Gi-hoon forgetting for long stretches about the promises he made to other contestants, felt incongruous. And I just don't think that cut looks good on him. And for reasons I'll get into later, I felt like there were a lot of ideas Squid Game was building up to that ultimately had far less of a thought-out conclusion than we'd been led to believe. But for me, the show does something very important very well. It reminds viewers, and in particular viewers who live in relative physical and financial comfort, what life is like for the other side. Which is to say, the majority of the population who live in a state of constant economic insecurity. The show does a good job of putting audiences not just into the position of desperate people, but of doing it in a way that is engaging and entertaining and wouldn't necessarily alienate a normie crowd who might not want to watch some really dry political treatise on the troubles in our society. For as crazy as the show gets, it remains emotionally real, and I think that's important because when things become distant and abstract, it becomes very easy to look away. Like, look, my country's Conservative Party recently announced that they will be doubling the financial requirement for citizens to sponsor family visas, taking up to a number that like a quarter of people in the country could actually achieve. Now, I don't meet this requirement and I have a non-citizen partner. If I can't meet this requirement, the person I love will be deported. This isn't abstract to me. It's a very real thing that will have a profound impact on my life, despite being set up by people who have no clue what they're talking about and will never have to deal with this problem themselves. All of this for the sake of this political farce that just continue to push blame onto the immigrants that actually help support our society, and away from the tax-dodging multi-millionaires who have actually been sucking it dry to this day, while continuing to do everything they can to... Can we please talk about Squid Game, YouTube dipshit? Sorry. I'll fucking kill you. And that's the point. People don't generally want a sad rant, they want entertainment. And if you can do that while also reminding them of a few things that matter, I think that's a good thing. It's what I try to do with this channel, and it's what the show does. So effectively, it even became a rallying point for a general strike in the country it was produced in. Did the conclusion fall short? I would say yes. I was really hoping the show would have literally anything more to say about the conditions of our current class-based society, other than that we have to have hope in the inherent goodness of people. Other people have criticized the show by calling it a plot hole that the hosts of the games insist that they are trying to be fair while clearly running a game that is consistently biased and unfair in implicit and explicit ways.
So the whole point of the game is that no one ever has an unfair advantage, but at the same time, they obviously don't want to kill the old man since he's the host of the entire thing. He has in-universe plot armor, baby. So like, how exactly was the tug-of-war game supposed to go down if his team lost? Maybe the game was somehow designed so that the old man's team couldn't lose, which would effectively give an unfair advantage to 9 of the other players. Nice going, you PlayStation-ass morons.
I think this is a pretty bad criticism that misses a clear point, that while the authorities that maintain this oppressive system are ignorant or indifferent to people's real struggles, they are not necessarily doing it as cartoon villains so detached from humanity. In fact, the ultra-rich constantly try to justify themselves morally.
They tainted the pure and fair ideology everything here has been built upon.
Wanting to feel like they are playing fairly and considering the will of the impoverished.
Show mercy to the miserable!
The illusion of fairness and charity can be a way to soothe the conscience. Foreshadowing for later. But this does create a different problem with the ending. If we're appealing to the inherent goodness of people, what about the people that have convinced themselves that they are good?
It was a dream, just think of it that way. And it really wasn't a bad one for you either.
It's a moralizing conclusion that leaves the whole show's point vague in a way that is not inherently wrong for media. Not all art needs to be so explicit and direct, but the rest of the show is so explicit and direct that it was a disappointment, at least to me. At the same time, there's only so much direct messaging a piece of entertainment media produced by Netflix is gonna be able to have. It will be recuperated in the way corporate-backed criticism of corporate trends always is. Funko Pop, Funko Pop, Funko Pop, please see like 4 other videos I've made on this topic.
But the vibes are immaculate, and even if I don't feel like the show quite stuck the landing, it's hard to ignore what Squid Game is. A show that takes square aim at the free market myth by looking at the desperation that often forces people to accept cruel conditions to survive. A show about what people will sink to when they've been materially pressured to do so, even with the illusion of choice, and the callous ways they'll be treated by the privileged for their own gain and amusement. A message repeatedly expressed, even by the show's own creator, that couldn't possibly be missed by anyone. Anyway.
The original Squid Game series quickly became Netflix's most popular original show debut, a position which it still holds despite the widespread success of competing franchise media like Wednesday or true crime filth like Dharma, and was reported to have single-handedly generated over $900 million of value for Netflix on a $15.5 million budget, a return on investment that may be referred to by some as absolutely fucking ludicrous. But the show's creator, writer, and director Hwang Dong-hyuk does not own the rights to Squid Game. He sold them to get the show made, receiving no royalties for its success and having no creative control on what is done with the property, having to hold on faith that the corporate powers that do understand and are responsible for it. Anyway, Netflix made Squid Game real.
Oh my god!
That sucks.
At last, we have created the Tormed Nexus from classic sci-fi novel Don't Create the Tormed Nexus.
Running for 10 excruciating hour-long episodes, Squid Game The Challenge is a hellish chimera of the Squid Game format with the editing of a Kitchen Nightmares episode in a way that would make Shu Tucker blush. I would apologise for making you remember that Full Metal Alchemist episode, but I think it's important you're really in the right headspace to fully take in this depraved corporate product.
It is the most ambitious, slightly crazy idea that anybody's ever had for a show.
Quick disclaimer I really wish I didn't need to add, but just because I'm going to be critical here, that doesn't mean you need to go out and harass the crew or other participants of the show, so don't do that. Love you.
Let me be clear that I did not intend on watching the Squid Game reality show spin-off, but I was eating curry one night and my mum put it on, so as always, please blame her. You've been once again asked to apologise for what you've done.
What have I done?
And then also just...
When this channel was first coming back, I had a moment where I got really into the idea of a video essay about Is It Cake, a briefly trending show that seemed to revel in being self-aware at just how inane and throwaway it was, with a host who came off like he was on the verge of a mental breakdown at any given moment.
And this knife.
I can't say conclusively if it's worse to produce art that is constantly pointing out how meaningless it is, or that constantly reproduces the aesthetic of meaning with nothing behind it, but they both kind of make me want to die.
Now I want to get into a few ways the show specifically is bad, but I can already get the sense there's going to be some viewers coming into this that already have their responses to a video like this, and I want to kind of get ahead of them. Like, for instance, you might say, if you have criticisms of a show, why not just ignore that it exists and go do something else? Now, to that criticism I would say, okay, they gone? Anyway, you might also say that any attempt at direct comparison between this Squid Game reality spin-off and the original show is kind of silly, and I think that's where I actually want to start.
The fact is that as much as the game show borrows a lot of the look and structure of the Squid Game, it doesn't actually involve killing people who lose, which is kind of a big part of the original thing. Instead, people just have ink packs that explode on them, leading to a very funny diversity in how much people commit to the bit. As executive producer Tim Harcourt put it, director Huang's vision was about need. The players are all in desperate times. For us, it was about opportunity. These are players who wanted to win that money because of the opportunity offered rather than need.
At the end of the day, this was all just a load of fun. It wasn't like anyone actually put themselves through harsh physical mistreatment just for the sake of competing for this prize. Is there a league? Oh, Jesus Christ!
So yes, it is verifiably true that the people who signed up for the game were put through various forms of grueling physical pain to compete. Most of these reports revolve around the game show's spin on the first challenge, red light, green light, because unlike the show, the whole thing wasn't done within 5 minutes. Instead, the plan was to constantly force players to freeze in place while adjudicators verified if they had moved, meaning people who had just been forced into thin, show-designated uniforms then had to stand still in freezing cold temperatures for up to hours at a time. Bear in mind that a lot of these people were not from the UK where the show was filmed and weren't really used to British weather, which, as someone who is again married to a non-citizen, can be pretty grueling in itself.
Freezing.
This wasn't just I felt cold, this was people's limbs going numb and multiple contestants needing to be carried off for medical treatment. At least 10 people collapsed over the course of the game, with other contestants needing to stay fixed in place for fear of being eliminated themselves while producers took their time making sure the shots lined up right.
I think that the last round of people to make it through ended up playing for almost 8 hours. I was playing for about 4.5. But every single time that they stopped the clock, I mean, we were standing there for like between 20 and 45 minutes, and I know because I counted the seconds because I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to pass the time. This is me after passing red light, green light, and your girl was cold. Someone from production told us afterwards that it was 24 degrees and we were literally just wearing those green tracksuits and like slip-on bands.
Harcourt did actually try to get ahead of this story. During the same interview, he was talking about the anti-capitalism being only a small part of the original series, saying that the whole thing was tested and it was a cold day and all appropriate measures were taken and other things that almost sound like addressing the criticism. This is something I would be joking about in a making of documentary.
And then shaking, the whole body's shaking. And some of the shots of the people in those still positions were amazing.
So they show that girl in the squat and it's like, okay, she can't hold the squat for like 10 seconds or whatever. No, it was literally like probably 30, 45 minutes, however long she was holding that squat for.
Because how could you have known that contestants might need to be stuck in awkward positions for long stretches of time? You'd have to test for something like that. Now, none of this sounds to me like something you just do for the sake of a fun opportunity, but what do I know? At the very least, the actual game was still being adjudicated fairly, right? Right?
Three former players describe what contestants are now calling the 38-second massacre, when a large group of contestants made it across the finish line with time remaining on the clock, meaning they had successfully made it through to the next round. However, as they waited for producers to go over footage and get drone shots from the round, their blood squib packs went off minutes later, and they were told they had been eliminated, despite making it across the finish line.
So I think we're all aware that most reality shows are kind of like professional wrestling. Like, there is usually something physically happening in front of you, but it's all very kind of choreographed and manicured into the show that the producers are trying to make. But I still think it's important to put yourself into the position of someone who has just put themselves through 9 hours of, to put it mildly, medically significant discomfort to potentially win some prize money on a game show, and then at the end of those 9 hours, to be told that they're getting written off the show anyway because the producers wanted someone's mum to get through.
I don't want this video to just be me listing off facts from articles about the show's production, so I'll just say these are not the only complaints made by participants of the show, and maybe we won't even find out the full extent until that lawsuit that's apparently happening. Netflix itself did another joint statement with the production companies linked to the show, saying that while it was very cold on set and participants were prepared for that, any claims of serious injury are untrue. We care deeply deeply about the health and safety of our cast and crew and invested in all the appropriate safety procedures. We've taken all the appropriate safety precautions, including aftercare for contestants, and an independent adjudicator is overseeing each game to ensure it's fair to everyone. What interesting phrasing!
You must be guaranteed the same opportunities without being disadvantaged or facing any kind of discrimination. Each and every one of you is considered an equal within the walls of this facility.
This show is bad. There's a lot of minor grievances barely worth pointing out about the way Squid Game The Challenge was put together, but this is my video, so I'm gonna say them anyway. Battleship is a stupid replacement for the Tug of War Challenge. Wait, sorry, I mean Warships.
Warships.
Which is definitely a way I've heard someone refer to Battleship ever in my life. I do understand the necessity of finding a replacement for the game that's about pulling people into a hole, but there's something very stilted about a team challenge that's actually just one person making decisions that might happen to result in a whole line of people getting eliminated. Especially when the format means that you then have to just watch lights slowly turn on in a predictable pattern over and over again. The set design is cool. In fact, the one area of the show I'd really never criticize is the production value itself. It's clear that there was a lot of care made to try and authentically recreate elements from the show, and even looks like they briefly got Huang over to give his take on it.
Same as the original set.
Okay, thanks Huang. Back to your hole! But the visual element is really all this game has going for it, and a lot of the substitutions don't even have that. I'm not saying we needed brutal nighttime murder fest, but instead we got everyone standing in a circle in a big room throwing dice, and then if you get the wrong number on the dice, you leave. The kind of Squid Game challenge that really puts some strong imagery in your head, like the image of producers realizing they still have too many contestants, so one of them says, well, I have a dice. And then in the climactic finale, instead of epic fight to the death in the rain, we get rock, paper, scissors in a dark room. I understand the desire to make the final challenge something that feels more quiet and intimate, but I don't know, maybe at least put in some cool buttons. Oh wait, you already did that with the last challenge. And I'm not opposed to doing Dalgona again, but people went really hard on the spitting, and I did not need to see that. Like I say, these are pretty petty grievances, because at the end of the day, Squid Game was never really about the games. The reason that across the original 9-episode run, there were really only like 5 of them. I would say there were 2 primary focuses of the show itself. Firstly, it was about analysing the psychology of the players within their situations, who they are and why they're making these choices. You could say this is where the reality spin-off is so much worse, because inherent to the game show structure and the way they're constantly trying to keep it vague who wins is incoherently jumping around between contestants to the point where you get very little meaningful understanding of anything about them.
I don't remember if it's 302 or 302. I just want to make sure.
It's the same.
I think I got it
Either
now.
one.
What is
It's
it?
okay.
Or what motivates their choices. The main show is less concerned with that, and while I did criticize it earlier for being fairly predictable as a result, you kind of always know the characters who get more development are gonna last longer. It's also a reminder that this is what the whole thing is about, and not just who among this spicy ensemble are going to get Big Pig. At a certain point, the game show also functions as a kind of narrative, and it's a narrative where at the end you have a whole lineup of people who the audience have spent almost no time with, which the show then tries to hastily patch up with designated reality show sit-down asides.
Parmigiana, pizza arrabbiata, penne alla matriciana.
I have a math degree. I have a master's degree.
I'm an introverted extrovert.
Contestants are introduced and then eliminated in the most anticlimactic ways, and then in the end you get Big Beard Man. Who is Big Beard Man, and why do I feel any kind of stake or even interest in his decisions or successes? Oh, it's because he's gay. I guess him winning is like the gays win. Well, I support the gay. Oh, we lost the barn game. I no longer support the gays.
Sorry if you made it this far and still thought I wasn't going to spoil the results of the show, by the way. I guess now you don't need to watch it.
It's kind of a bad narrative mixed with a bad social experiment, which I guess tragically describes a lot of modern game shows. Honestly, to try and get anything out of this in terms of like a social experiment has a very Stanford prison experiment vibe, which in terms of what participants were subjected to, I guess isn't a totally invalid comparison. At least Philip Zimbardo paid people a wage.
0 GBP, 0 USD, 0 rupees, 0 won, 0 pesos, 0 euros, 0. Literally 0. It was all or nothing, and we were really in there.
acting like that for nothing.
I didn't personally get paid for participating. As far as I'm aware, nobody did, to be honest. Like, just participating isn't enough. Who knows if I got the ultimate pay? We don't know.
That's right, I'm praising the people that ran the Stanford prison experiment in comparison to the people that made this show. That's how far we've come. It's a social experiment in the same way like a YouTube prank video is. Would it be too spicy if I started making like a Jubilee comparison right now?
But there's a second element to Squid Game that's also missing here, and I think is more important. I feel like a lot of viewers were surprised, given the way that original show was sold to audiences, that in the second episode there's a vote to just leave the game, and that actually happens. But I'd argue it's one of the most important statements of that whole series. We get an entire episode where people are freely allowed to just return to their miserable, impoverished lives, escaping debt collectors and exploitative bosses and other things that are clearly meant to represent communism.
They all enter the game as equals, and they're allowed to play as equals. And there's an arc in the show where it's like somebody violates the equality, and so they kill him. And they were like, that's the worst thing you could have done, is strip the equality. In this equal system, everyone dies but one person who gets all of the money. In this system, everyone is wearing the same clothes in the same room, being brutalized by the powers that ultimately results in one person having all the wealth and everyone dying. That is not capitalism.
Squid Game's general narrative can be interpreted as an allegory for social issues caused by monopolies and corruption. Now, the issue here is that capitalism actually does a better job at preventing monopolies and corruption than socialism does.
And if this guy who made the show is actually like, it's actually capitalism that's bad, I'm like, it just goes to show this is a person who made a great show but was really dumb and didn't understand they were actually critiquing communism. I don't think it's overtly political. It just goes to show this is a person who was really dumb.
And this one's particularly silly because I honestly can't tell if Sean is just being ironic here.
It looms over the rest of the series that everyone we see here is knowingly agreeing to the terms they've been given, adding this element where, even within the show's bizarre world, you can see the twisted logic of how the people managing the game are justifying themselves. They have set clear terms, and are willing to go as far as to kill employees who blatantly breach their sense of fairness behind the game. But it still isn't fair, as you can see from the perspective of the players. They are only doing this because they have been forced into such a desperate situation which any of these people funding the game could resolve for them in an instant. And there are so many other avenues to argue the competition itself isn't fair in ways that are just less obnoxious to the people watching. Like when they just kill the guy who can tell which glass to step on, not because they particularly cared about players having natural advantages up to that point, but just because it spoiled the whole tension for them. All of this, more than anything, I think is why so many people don't think the creators of this game show actually understood anything about the series they were basing it on. That was the second part of the show's focus, the viewer. The viewer as in the audience, and the audience within the show. They knowingly exploit the dreams and ambitions of their participants, aware that most will only suffer for nothing for their own amusement.
Why do you want to win?
Because I can't afford to retire.
And did you graduate?
No, ma'am. I dropped out to come here.
And then they break those dreams.
They're all coming with amazing dreams of what they would do with $4.5 million. And every time they're eliminated, somebody's dream dies.
The loss of 299 is one of the biggest shows of emotion early in the episodes, with the producers really lingering on how broken down the guy gets about it. And while it wasn't really discussed in the show, 299 is a 21-year-old recent cancer survivor. I don't know much about him personally, but I do know that the average cost of cancer treatment in the US is $150,000, and in a lot of cases that's on the low end. For these contestants, there's a lot more going into this than just wanting to win a game.
People were genuinely going, well, I want to be here because this is how I've got to where I am. This is what my real life is like. It was just very, very moving.
It's a really, really emotional game.
You really can't have this both ways. You can't pointedly use the emotional stakes of the money that's on offer and the obvious toll that's going to take on the players to specifically drum up drama for your show, to the point where you're literally on the making of documentary gloating about it, like the making of documentary that auto-plays when you finish the show. And then defend your spin-off by saying, technically, it was all optional anyway, so there's no comparison. There is a comparison. It's called the second episode of Squid Game.
I talk about the guy here. So why did Netflix go ahead with the show anyway? Are they stupid? Well, there's a couple of elements to it. As far as the question, is Netflix willing to profit off of producing media that makes them out to be obvious hypocrites? The answer is yes, because they are a corporation that wants your money. They funded like a whole season of Black Mirror satirizing a huge part of their own business model. And this channel will become very ironic once Netflix buys the rights to my book, or if they don't do enough research and find this video before approving my application for the next season of the game show. But there's an underlying thing here that is bigger than Netflix. I mean, even profiting off of knowing hypocrisy isn't just a Netflix thing, it just seems like they're really leaning hard into that as their whole brand. As far as the bigger problem, I think it's time we go back to a friendly face we've talked about on this channel a couple of times before. After all, this isn't the first time someone made real-life Squid Game.
I recreated every single set from Squid Game in real life, and whichever one of these 456 people survives the longest wins 456 grand.
It's kind of funny that even though MrBeast's Squid Game seems to have recreated most of the same challenges as this multi-million-dollar Netflix production, there are actually fewer complaints about the conditions the contestants were subjected to, although apparently this has not been the case with every MrBeast competition.
From the start, it was a horrible experience. We were made to wait hours in 95-degree weather until we were able to get on the set to film this physically and emotionally grueling video. The actual floor of the circle was made of rough turf, and some of the girls had gotten allergic reactions to it. If you sat down with your hands or legs, it would leave a mark and make you start bleeding or getting rashes. Goink.
Here's my MrBeast thumbnail reaction to that.
While the original Squid Game was obviously a kind of broad, general anti-capitalist critique, it was also specifically commentary on the culture surrounding game shows and how they fit in with this economic system. People who are often trying to get themselves out of their current day-to-day class position, if not out of debt or just a shitty job, and willingly subject themselves to intense physical and psychological pain to get there. When I was a kid, I watched a lot of Takeshi's Castle, and honestly didn't think that much about the implications of that stepping stone game.
Oh, that looked like it hurt a lot.
Among this crowd, MrBeast has harnessed a particularly brazen form of the poor person torture challenge, and he's gotten a lot of criticism for it. In part because he's a YouTube influencer who makes this face a lot, and I would say in part because, at least with other shows like this, there is usually more emphasis on a rapid-fire selection of games, whereas MrBeast's challenges sometimes lean more on the long-term psychological torture social experiments, involving people having to wait in confined spaces, often without sleep, for long stretches of time until they finally break. At time of recording, his last challenge involved a man getting $10,000 for every day he spent trapped in a supermarket, with the video mostly tracking his gradual mental deterioration as he contemplates how much he's willing to go through for the payout.
It's the first interaction I get all day, and it's the freaking robot. Thanks for the money. Not even Jimmy wants to come here for a minute. That's how depressing this place is now. Can't say I blame him, honestly. This sucks, man.
Now, I'll just say my pet peeve with this type of content is how much it has skewed people's understanding of what charity is. Because I feel like it needs to be pointed out that giving a guy $500,000 to spend a month and a half isolated in a warehouse is definitely not charity. It's literally just paying someone a large sum to do a particularly grueling type of labor. The only thing that makes this seem charitable is the subjective judgment that this person's physical and mental health and a month and a half of their time is not worth this amount of money. If it was Timothée Chalamet trapped in a room that long, people would probably just say he was being underpaid. I don't want to seem overly unfair to Jimmy here. Contestants do generally seem grateful for the experience. I like how he usually makes a point of paying people just for taking part, and even with the supermarket challenge, it's cool that the leftovers were donated to worthy causes. And even in contrast to this kind of psychological damage, MrBeast's Squid Game doesn't seem so bad, but it's still the most popular video on his channel and receives the majority of criticism for the reasons I've already talked about with the Netflix show. The thing is, people still overall liked MrBeast's Squid Game, even if they enjoyed the original show and the points it was making. And despite everything I've been talking about up to now, about the actual harm being done in the name of these shows, the lies sometimes told in staging them, of the wider hypocrisy of treating this as simple choice when a giant cash prize is involved, I think there's an obvious reason people still approve of this kind of content. Because at the end of the day, stripped of the actual life and death stakes of the original series, it really is just a game show.
There's really nothing that can be said about Squid Game or Mr. Beast Squid Game that can't also kind of just be applied to most game show competition media, or even a lot of competitions outside of a game show context. People take time out to achieve feats and sometimes gamble on good luck, all in the hopes that at the end of it they're going to get a large payout. It's not really exceptional. If you don't like it, you kind of just don't like game shows.
I don't like game shows. On this channel, I've talked about exploitative reality TV content before, about Kitchen Nightmares and the way it crafts a specific ideology out of the editing of the material, about Jeremy Kyle and other trash TV shows that specifically earn their trade out of making a spectacle and a mockery of often desperate people. But more than anything, I think I have a very difficult relationship with the game show, and it actually goes back to a point Squid Game as a series was making, that once large sums of money are involved, it isn't actually a game. Money as a concept is abstract. Its application in reality is material. There are obvious, immediate stakes set by the opportunity to pay off debts or give yourself a boost in life by earning what you might otherwise make in decades in the span of a few hours. And almost every one of these shows specifically preys on that and even plays it up to add to the drama. I'll admit I've always immediately switched off emotionally whenever I've been watching one of these shows and it's revealed that the contestants already come from money and therefore won't actually be affected that much if they win the prize. And the producers know that I'm not alone in that. They know that I also understand the hold that money can have on people.
What is the jeopardy that you put into those games, both sort of physically and psychologically?
Fortunately, we came up with a solution. $4.56 million.
It's an obvious point, but people usually aren't doing this for the sheer competitive thrill of beating out these other players. They're doing it for a chance to massively improve their own lives. If I were playing, I wouldn't be spending the whole time thinking about how this is my chance to show how exceptional or ambitious I am. I would be thinking about how this money might help me prevent the person I love from being deported. This video is about Squid Game. But Squid Game wasn't just about the Squid Game, it was also about people. It was about people and the pressures that modern society places on them in a way that infects every facet of their lives. This video is also about James Somerton.
H-Bomber Guy recently released a quite exceptional video essay about YouTube plagiarism, exposing a few channels that highlight an increasing problem with the platform, the theft of other people's work as a way to lazily rush your way to status and success. In it, he talks about YouTube as a space for personal creativity and how these practices are really a perversion of that, and not the good kind. But if there's one part of his take that I have to take a strong disagreement with, it's this.
Why do people plagiarize? We've talked a lot of superficials in this video, wanting money or prestige or clout or to get one over on your enemies by jacking their stuff, but these are small things. There's other ways of getting those.
I don't want to be accused of clip-chimping the... No, I don't like that word. Of taking that part of the video out of context, because it's really a great segment where H-Bomb talks about how people can have these deeper feelings of emptiness, and I really think he has a point there. I'm empty all over, and not the good kind. But while he's right that you can get money and prestige in these other ways, they're not small things. In the case of why people turn to YouTube specifically to make money, I can't really say. For me personally, I've tried plenty of other ways to make a living, and YouTube has just so happened to fit within my specific skill set and brand of mental illness. You might as well be asking why people go on game shows with the expectation that it's going to be their path to a better life.
What is it in us that decides which physical or mental compromises we're willing to make to succeed? I think that's a really difficult question, but from the outside, it's not hard to look at what other people do and realize that they are often far too willing to put themselves through a lot of pain and stress, with too much risk of getting too little in return. That's always been the true horror depicted in Squid Game, that it was never really about this Saw-like structure of desperate people being forced through this hellish gauntlet of death, but the fact that at every turn these people are willing to do this. For a chance. And you can put as many wacky sound effects and funny editing tricks over it as you want, but that horror remains when you bring that story to reality. I often don't like game shows because, like I say, they're not games. It's people putting themselves through the same calculations of physical and emotional labor that anyone does when they decide to do a job. And more we're seeing how much that will be pushed for the sake of a fun spectacle. It's just gambling, because as much as you might win and have your life change forever, maybe you'll just spend 9 hours freezing in a warehouse and then be rushed to hospital with nothing to show for it.
And when I connect this to the issue of YouTube plagiarism, I'm definitely not doing it to make excuses for people like James Somerton. An unethical choice is an unethical choice, but something a lot of these game shows increasingly play with is that there's a type of compromise you can make that isn't physical or mental, but moral. And just like how some people can have certain physical advantages, some people have the advantage of loose morals. One way or another, we are always making these calculations, and material want and need only makes it easier to make the bad choice. I don't think childhood games are so special just because you were a kid when you were playing them. I think it's also because as you get older, you join the real world, and suddenly that too becomes a part of these material calculations, even if it's just a calculation of whether you can afford to spend the time. The money really does ruin everything. It chips away at your mind and your body, and I can't help feeling like, at least in some small way, these feelings of emptiness come from that. I wish I could say I make YouTube videos only because of my own personal creative ambitions. In fact, I've literally said in other videos, quite naively, that that's exactly what I'm going to be exclusively motivated by.
I'm just never going to let myself be in a position where I make myself make something that I feel like I'm obligated to make.
Shortly before needing to save up thousands of dollars for a visa. I wish that I could enjoy game shows like this and know that it's all just a bit of fun as it's often presented. I wish we could enjoy games like we were kids again. But we can't, and we won't, because currently it, like everything else from our bank account to our health and our time, is all currently connected to an economic system that is constantly trying to find ways to exploit that time and that health.
Maybe there's something to be said for how the flimsy conclusion of the original Squid Game leaves the door open for something like Squid Game The Challenge. That by appealing purely to a kind of idealistic sentiment about believing in people, it really makes it easy for shows like this to be okay with fairly straightforward moral justifications. I'm sure at least some of the producers even feel like there's something positive the show is presenting, especially when you see later on how often people come together in collaboration and empathy where the original had them tearing each other apart. It's just not a purely moral problem, it's a material one, and the original show is right to point out that stopping the game doesn't stop the system. It is difficult to give simple directions on how we deal with that, and especially to do so with a streaming series produced by Netflix. But again, there was a brief moment that series became a rallying cry for a lot of people who also feel that angst at this miserable condition.
Everything else aside, what is Squid Game The Challenge? A product that takes all of that critique and commentary and angst and strips it all out so it can be repackaged as exactly the kind of aspirational fairy tale story that the original show was actively trying to tear down, to expose as hollow in the face of this terrible system. Ultimately, Squid Game The Challenge shouldn't exist, for the same reason Squid Game The Series does. Thank you for watching. If you like the video, please consider liking or commenting. It's become kind of a trend on this channel where if I get enough comments, I'll usually do a follow-up video where I address things people are saying. You can also consider using any of the tip links down in the description. I think that's pretty much everything actually. I don't think I have much loose ends for the year. So I would say, yeah, just thanks for watching and
Remember to check the Fume link. Just check down there, Fume link.